you're going to do it, the audit should be worth it. The problem is, audits are hard. Yet we've issued over 20,000 reports to 2,000 clients worldwide.
A lot of times I'll find, oh, that company name right there is not your company name.
Oh, no.
Oh, that is a university's name.
Cybersecurity and compliance will no longer be a mystery. Hey everyone, welcome into our cybersecurity mission. My name is Ali Krings. I'll be your host. Today I am joined by Nathan Stevens. He's a professional writer with Kirkpatrick Price. Nathan, it's great to have you.
Thanks.
You know, when you think of an auditing firm, you usually think of auditors.
True.
I didn't realize that there were also writers that were such a critical component.
Yeah, that's honestly one of the big things that we feel sets us apart. You know, I don't want to overly generalize, but oftentimes the skill set that comes with auditors may not be that conducive to clear communication of complicated and technical concepts to a non-technical audience. And so that was one of the things, I think it was around 8 years ago, was when KP hired their first writers to take the information that was generated by the auditors and produce a report that was hopefully clearer and more coherent. Our clients have loved it. Our auditors have really loved it because they don't have to spend that time producing the end report. But that's actually, I am completely outside of even that process. I have never constructed a single work paper in my time here at KP. What I do is kind of different. I used to tell people that I was sort of this little unicorn off in the corner because while I was under the writing team.
Do unicorns belong in the corner?
I'm not sure. I don't know what the proper habitat for a unicorn is, but
usually like a pedestal is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, or maybe a nice like pasture
I
with
like
some
that.
hay.
Cool.
But I never did the same thing as the rest of the writers. From the beginning, I was hired to help write policies and procedures. So the output of the rest of the writing team would be the various audit reports. That comes in at the tail end of their audit process. Generally, I really came in more at the front end, often after we would do like a gap analysis for a client, and we would see many times one of the primary issues is a client just doesn't have policies and procedures, or maybe they do, but what they have is really insufficient. And they probably don't have the knowledge or the resources, the people, the time to work on that themselves. So I would step in, help them write their policies, and then they would move into their audit and they would use those policies in the audit. So that's sort of the function that I served here.
Okay, so with the policies, I guess, why do companies maybe not already have them, but also why do they even need them?
I would say a lot of times, there's several reasons for that. A lot of the clients, particularly that I work with, are newer and smaller companies. I mean, I give this example a lot on calls with clients, but I had a client that was, I believe they were 2 months old as an organization.
Oh, wow.
And they had 5 people. So they had kind of, the 3 of the founders had broken off from the previous company they worked at together, and they wanted to make this really tailored software as a service offering. So they were just getting off the ground. I was honestly surprised that they were working on things that quickly. So I have some clients that are like that, and then I have some clients that are, you know, they're a legacy organization that's been around for 20 or 30 years, but they're maybe not as technology pointed. You know, maybe they're some sort of a shipping company or something like that. And they've just always done business the way they've done things. And now, as everything becomes, you know, more integrated with technology, they're getting clients, they're getting vendors who are wanting to see what does your SOC 2 report say? What does your PCI report say? And they're realizing that fundamental to any of these frameworks is going to be a big suite of policies. And so they're realizing they finally need to put that together. Because many times with those old organizations, they're just like, we know how we do things. Everyone knows what they're supposed to do. And that works until it doesn't work. It works until you have an issue.
So you mentioned the fact that a lot of people have this is the way we've always done things, this is how it's meant to be. You know, I think with some policies, it's just we don't do that, or it's a generalization. What's the problem with having just a general policy as opposed to something that's really concise?
So policy, there are a lot of reasons why. I'm gonna modify your question and use it as a springboard to a thing I wanted to talk about, which is like just some of the important purposes, reasons you need to have policies. Really quickly, I'll slide in that one of the most important ones is that pretty much any regulatory or industry framework is going to explicitly require it.
Yeah.
They're going to require certain policies are in place and that those policies touch on certain things. So for instance, if you handle credit card information, you need to consider PCI. If you're dealing with healthcare information, HIPAA and HITRUST probably apply to you. If you have the data of European citizens, then you've got to think about GDPR and what it says about privacy. So that's, you may be legally required to have policies in place. And so you may just already be in violation of something out there that you're supposed to have and you're not doing. Those are kind of external reasons why policies are really important, but what I think you're kind of touching on with your question is some of the more internal reasons that policies are really useful. And to me, the biggest one is that they help provide clarity. They help say, this is what we want you to do. This is why you're supposed to do it that way. I always tell people, think about your organization. Even if you're a small organization, each person that works there is different. They're an individual. They have different pre-existing knowledge, different experience. They have different ideas about how things should be done. And so if you don't communicate how you want things to be done, everyone's going to probably kind of go with that their own way. And tied in with that, you have your different knowledge levels. The chief technology officer is going to know a lot more about information security than someone that you just hired to join the writing team, like myself. When I came to KP, I knew nothing. When I was joining those weekly audit training calls every week, I was hearing all these words I didn't know and made a Excel spreadsheet of glossary terms for myself to look up and define so that I could learn a little bit more. So the policies should make just as much sense to that brand new hire who's like, what does sass mean? When I hear sass, I think of like a cat with an attitude. I like that. You want it to make sense to that person just as much as you want it to make sense to someone who's got 7 certifications after their email signature. So that's a core reason why policies are important, is kind of bridging that gap, getting everybody on the same page. Tied into that, in addition to clarity, is uniformity. You want people doing things in the same way. So even if you've got 10 writers on your writing team, you want them to understand, here is the way that we do writing reports. Here's the way, a KP example, we talk a lot on the Friday calls about the client visit week. The client visit week is a huge part of the way that we do audits. It's one of the things that really sets us apart, is our emphasis on sending the auditor to you, to look around your office, to actually meet people, to open that closet and see if anybody can just go in there and start unplugging things. The client visit week is important. We have a defined way we want to do that. We have a defined order that we want to address the topics. We want to do the organization overview early on so that we know who you are and what you do before we get into these more granular topics. So your policies help ensure not only do people know what's expected, but that everyone's kind of pulling the wagon in the same direction in the same fashion.
So how are you even starting to write these policies? Because I feel like that alone, and a lot of times the wordage, like you said, can be really challenging or really dense. So how do you write something just from the beginning?
That is a great question. I think a helpful starting point, whether or not you're ultimately concerned about like compliance with a framework, you may not care about SOC 2 compliance or PCI or anything. That's fine. A good place to start is to look at some kind of standard. So for SOC 2, you've got the trust services criteria. For PCI, you have the PCI DSS. Read through those. Look at them. That's going to give you a really kind of comprehensive overview of some of the areas you need to think about. Now, every single control in there, every single element may not apply for you, but it can at least kind of help you generate a list of, here are the things we need to think about and address somewhere in our policy. So you're not starting from scratch. I think if you just got a big, you've got a big whiteboard over on the side that you're just like, we need to have this policy and this policy, it's easy to forget things and leave things out. So start with a standard is point one. The next piece is if you're looking at a standard, if you've got, I know that people usually start by looking up. They just Google acceptable use policy, or they Google incident response policy. That's fine. You're going to get some results. That's fine. You need to take what you find there and you need to make it yours. You need to modify it. You need to change it. I can't tell you how many times I've been doing a policy engagement with a client, and we always ask them, upload your current policies for me to look
Great.
at. For one, sometimes there's some good stuff there. Sometimes it gives me a lot of insight into the way you do things.
Yeah.
While also, letting me know there's some serious gaps here. But a lot of times I'll find, that company name right there is not your company name.
Oh, no.
That is
Okay.
a university's name. And that tells me that those were probably pulled directly from the internet. Many times the universities, their policies are publicly available. So that is often a good resource, is to find, you'll see, it's Washington State University's background check policy.
Cool.
Okay, cool. You can start from
Yep.
there, but look at it. Maybe at least change the names on there so that it says your organization's name, but
Right.
then read through the information, see what you are committing yourself to doing in your
Yeah.
policy. Keep in mind that an auditor is going to see these someday if you go through an audit, and they're going to want to see evidence that you're doing all those things that you say that you do. So it's fine to use that as a starting point. When I have a client that asks me, hey, do you have an X policy? And I look in our policy library and there isn't one, I will Google and see what's out there, and then I will ask the client questions about how they actually do those different things and
Yeah.
change that so that it really reflects what they're doing. You want your policies to be accurate to what you actually do. You don't want them to be aspirational. These are the things we would like to do. These are the things we will one day
Sure.
do. Because if you don't get around to doing those things prior to your audit, now you're in trouble. Now you've made a bunch of claims that you
That
can't back
aren't
up.
occurring.
Yeah, with any evidence. So you can. I always say to people, your policies in a way, from an audit point of view, kind of set your rubric.
Yep.
Of you're like, here's what we do, and so now they've got a list of the things to look for to see if you do, and can you produce evidence for those different things.
Yeah.
If you can't, you're kind of in a tough spot.
Nathan, I'm so glad we're sitting down, and I just want to let you guys know at home, if you're joining us today and you're enjoying listening to Nathan, I want to invite you to be able to go to kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast. You can also check the show notes down below, pull up and submit your own questions. Maybe you're interested in learning more about writing policy, why we need certain procedures, or even extra help. Those are things that we can always cover in the future. So we're not quite done here yet, sorry.
No problem.
But I do want to talk to you about, I think when you download a template,
Yeah.
we've all started in an entry-level role, right? We've all been there. And a lot of times somebody might download a template and they hand it off to the newest person at the
Yeah.
company, and it's a busy work exercise, and they're like, here, fix this up. Walk me through why we can't just be handing off that written work to the newest face in the
Sure.
company.
So this is an excellent segue into one of the core things I want to talk about with policies, is that your policies need to have a certain level of managerial involvement. There needs to be the authority that comes from, this has the voice of management has approved these ideas, but you don't want the policies to have you don't want just anyone to decide, I'm going to write a bunch of policies for our company and tell everyone to do this. It should originate at some point from management has seen the reason that you need to do this, they've seen it's important, and they've decided to do it. Management should have a level of input into that content.
Totally.
I understand that for some more technical or really specific policies, that might not be the area of expertise of everyone on the management team, but they should have some input in the way that you're choosing to approach things. And the critical point is all of your policies need to be approved. They need to be signed off by management before you disseminate them out to the organization. So if you wanted to just shove that off onto the most new person at your organization, first off, chances are they're not going to have the knowledge they need to really put that together. But even if you did give it to them, you would need someone at the management level to look at what it was that they generated and say, I'm fine with this. I'm good with this. This actually represents what we need to do. Now, the chances of that being accurate, if it's your newest employee, your most low-level employee that you just gave them this task, the chances are going to be almost zero that they're able to produce something that management is comfortable really getting behind and saying, yes, this is the way we want things done.
And so a big part of that, after that authority piece, is really getting into the review of what we've actually written.
Yeah, and a big part of in that creation part, whether I'm talking about making your brand new policies, or if you're needing to update your policies for any reason, is you need to make sure that the appropriate people are involved in that drafting process. So you need people who know about that particular area.
Yeah.
And we haven't really talked about this a lot, but there is a bit of a difference between what policies are and what procedures are. Your policies are more telling you what to do and why you need to do it. Procedures are a little more along the lines of how is it done,
Sure.
more of a kind of step-by-step technical direction.
Okay.
It's fine sometimes to integrate those into one. You might have both policy and procedure in the same document. I would say if you find that is really extending the length of your policies, that's a good time to break those up, because you want a policy document to be a reasonable length that someone can understand and digest in a short period of time.
Sure.
And find the exact accurate information that they're looking for. I know that seems like an aside. I get into all of that to say it's possible that the group of people involved in drafting your policy is different than the group of people drafting your procedure. Because you may say, here's what we want done, and that can be done. The people involved in that may be more the management level folks. But then let's say, for example, you're talking about your application development policy.
Okay.
I'm going to guess that not everyone in your C-suite level folks are all that familiar with the ins and outs of software development.
Sure, that's fair.
So they may say, we want these things done in a secure way, we want there to be peer review, this, that, and the other. That's great. When it comes to actually writing your procedure for how all of those things are done for your application development policy, that group of people is probably going to be more technical inclined folks. So you're going to have your senior DevOps engineers, and that's going to be a maybe two different conference rooms going at the same time.
Right,
but
right.
The point remains that for both sides there, you need to bring in the appropriate kind of stakeholders, the folks that know that area, are familiar with what's important, and those are the people that need to be involved in creating your policy, not just someone that looked like they didn't have enough work to do that particular day.
So obviously, you can write a beautiful policy, you can write down all of your procedures. That's just going to be on paper. That's just going to live, on your
SharePoint
document.
or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The critical part of that is to communicate it and ensure it actually gets done. What is your recommendation on how that communication takes place?
So there's a couple different ways you can do this. One really easy thing is that you should probably have people review your policies upon hire. As a part of the onboarding process. You're going to have to read through code of conduct, employee handbook, read through the relevant information security policies, or all of your policies that apply to every employee as a part of that onboarding process. So they've been kind of introduced to those concepts. And then you should also, organization-wide, you should review policies on an annual basis. That is something that we do here at KP. I always forget which month it is, but it's in the first quarter. An email goes out, and everybody has to click on the link, and they have to go through and read through a couple different documents, and then they have to DocuSign confirming that they have reread those.
Yep.
Part of why that's important is that your policies can change from year to year, and that's something I didn't touch on earlier. But the organization should do a annual policy review to see if anything needs changing, as well as employees on an annual basis need to read through those policies. So that's sort of two different types of review that we're talking about here. But there needs to be that refreshing of what do we cover here. And then you also need to have some kind of mechanism for anytime you have a big change to policy, disseminating that out to the organization. Maybe you do that. Like our company, we have calls every Friday. So maybe you address that on a company call, and then you also send out an email blast, or you send out a link to your Confluence page or something like that. The particular mechanism of the update is less important than you having some formalized process that you go through. And that's really throughout everything policy related. You want to have a process you're following so that you're making sure you're covering your different steps. Getting the management involvement on the front end, getting those appropriate experts involved, getting approval before those are sent out, figuring out how you're sending all that out, figuring out how you're getting everyone to look at all of these things. You need to make sure you've got a process that you're following, so that you are covering every step that needs to be covered. I mean, that's what policy is about, is
Yeah.
making sure that you're hitting all of those things.
Well, I think it's fair for any company to hear all those steps and feel intimidated or feel overwhelmed. and that's like really where you come in.
Right.
And I think part of one of the amazing things Kirkpatrick Price does is make it so comfortable. You know, it peels back a little bit of a layer to
Right.
be so intimidated. It makes it a little bit easier. You know, I'm sure you get questions about, you know, different areas all the time. What's
Yeah.
one of the biggest questions that clients ask you when they're about to start that auditing process and start working with you?
Our clients are always asking the auditors, you know, what is the main thing I'm going to get dinged for?
Yeah.
And I mean, every auditor may give you a slightly different answer, but a really common one that they're going to get is that there is misalignment between the things that they say they do. So this is the policies and procedures, and then what the controls they actually have in place and the evidence that they're able to generate to
Yeah.
show that those are properly functioning. So with policies, a foundational thing is that you need to do what you say you're doing.
Yep.
But just doing what you say you do doesn't mean you're in the clear if your policies are not at a sufficient level. So if you say, our password policy is that your password needs to be 3 characters long.
Okay.
And everybody's password is 3 characters long, we have followed our policy. Okay, you followed your policy, but that is not a good enough level. That's not a strong enough requirement. Those policies are not going to withstand any level of someone attempting to hack through those. So
Right.
the policies need to meet a bare minimum level, but you do need to make sure that you're following what you say you do. So if your policies say one thing, if what you're actually doing is different, and then that evidence you produce is not going to match. If those 3 things, that's what my boss likes to call that the 3-legged stool. You know, if your stool
Ooh.
doesn't have all 3 legs, it's going to fall over.
Yep,
So
that
having all
checks
3 of
out.
those is what keeps you stable, keeps you steady.
So, you know, it's always, I think, really rewarding when you can finish up with a client and
Yeah.
you're like, cool, great, you're in safe hands. What has been one of the biggest success stories for you working with a client?
One of my more recent clients, you're 100% right about that feeling of satisfaction. And that's one of the things that sometimes in my role, I can tell that the client they're doing the policy procedure engagement as an item on a checklist because it was something that they were told that they needed to do. And there's a low level of enthusiasm from their side.
Yeah.
There's a low level of engagement on calls, on responding to emails. Those are difficult. What I really love is when I have a client that is enthusiastic, that is responsive. And one of I think it was about a month ago, I had a policy engagement that really there were like 4 or 5 people on every call. It wasn't just the one person that had clearly been assigned to work on this with me that was like showing up out of obligation. There was a whole team that was showing up on the calls. When I would ask things, there were multiple people chipping in. It was discussion back and forth. When I submitted the draft, they actually had feedback. They actually had things they wanted me to change. And I thanked them for that. I said, I can't tell you how many of these engagements I have where I finish up policies, I send them out into the ether, and then I never hear anything.
Yeah.
And there's, I know I did my best, but some part of my brain is like, were these applicable? Were these accurate? Were they helpful? I don't know, because they never told me. They never told me. If you tell me, hey, we saw this little part, and that's not quite how we do things, that never hurts my feelings. That tells me you read that policy, and you read it closely enough, you were paying attention, and you realized this doesn't really reflect what we do. We want to tweak that a little bit, or we want to add in a piece here because we think it really strengthens our policy. So that's what I love, is when I get that higher level of engagement, because to me that tells me this is not an organization that is simply going through the motions, working their way through a checklist, doing the things that they're told they have to do. This tells me this is an organization that actually cares about information security. They want to do things the right way. They want to, operate appropriately and efficiently. They want to protect their clients' data. They want to do the right thing for their customers. So that always feels really good when I know at the end of the day that the policies I created were helpful because we had more back and forth and produced something that I know was going to reflect the way that they want to do things.
We're about to wrap up here, but I think for somebody who's been listening to us today, what advice do you have to give to them, like as they do maybe take this opportunity that's fresh in their mind to re-look over their policies, this week when they get back to work?
Yeah, I think read through what your policies say, and as you're reading each one, ask yourself, is this what we do?
Am I doing this
is
thing?
this actually what we do? And I mean, you can look at this in a positive way, is that sometimes maybe what you do is even better
Sure.
than what's in your policies. And so you could actually strengthen those policies, and they could look even more impressive, to an auditor or to an external eye, if you're like, you know what, we do even more than this. We are more on top of it than even what is reflected here. So it's not always a negative of, oh man, this says we do X, Y, and Z, and we don't, and we can't show that. A lot of times, you're actually doing a good job. You just haven't actually taken that time to update the policies, because we've talked about this throughout our conversation today. I say to clients all the time on the call, I understand this is my day job, and every person I talk to on a client call, they have a whole other job that they do all day long, and they're having to try to carve out time to do this policy piece that is not their area. So try to read through your company's policies and think about, is this really reflecting what we do? Also think about, if you pay really any attention to the news, to anything information security related, how long has it been since you heard about a breach? Probably only a couple days if you're, probably that day if you're following enough industry related things. But even if you're just following the general news, it's probably only been a few days since the last big breach. And so you never want to be that next big breach. And I say to my wife, I say to my friends, I was like, I feel like I have good job security here, because information security is not going anywhere. People need to spend time on this. They need to focus on it.
True.
As tech, even. It's not just tech companies. That's not, it's AWS. It's easy to understand that Amazon Web Services needs to worry about their information security. But guess what? So does your grocery store at the end of the block.
It's so true.
It's more and more integrated into every part of our lives that we need to think about this stuff.
Awesome. Well, Nathan, I want to say thank you so much for sitting down with me. I so appreciate it. And for everybody who's been listening along with us, thanks for sticking with us. If you have questions for Nathan or other topics that you want us to cover, please go ahead, go to kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast. You can check the show notes down below. But Nathan, thank you again for joining me.
Anytime.
My name is Allie Krings. We'll see you again soon on our cybersecurity mission. When you work with a Kirkpatrick Price cybersecurity auditor, you work with someone who's been in your shoes. Let's see what the next expert is ready to share to support you in your cybersecurity mission.
Hello, my name is Kurt Staven. I am a senior information security auditor at Kirkpatrick Price. One of my favorite topics is policy compliance. My recommendation is that you regularly review your information security policies at least once a year. If you find a policy standard that you are not currently following, ask yourself why. Why do you have that standard, and why have you not fully adopted it? You can then create one or more controls to enforce compliance and mitigate risk. Your auditor will then review those controls to make sure that they are well designed and well implemented. Another option is to remove that policy standard from your documentation. If you don't know what to do, reach out to me or the other security experts at Kirkpatrick Price. We are here to help you. That's what we do.
Are you ready to join a community of 10,000 people who are working together to elevate the standards for cybersecurity and compliance? It's free to sign up at kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast or check the show notes and achieve greater levels of assurance today. Thanks for joining us on our cybersecurity mission.